Along these lines, right, I want to look historically at his claim that the centrality of the person has been important to Western civilization. Right? Now, I'm not convinced it's unimportant to other civilizations, right? That's another story. Right? But let's look at what that might mean. Right? Here's where I see some defense of that. Traditionally, right, Western civilization has been heavily shaped by Christianity until really the 20th century. Right? It was a major force in shaping how people in the West saw the world. Right? Now, why is that important? Well, Christianity has always had an institutional separation of church and state. Okay. So the hierarchy, right? Well, basically, it was very rare to allow church hierarchy to hold high government office. It happened, right? And it's particularly happened to some extent in the feudal system, right? But for the head of state and the head of church to be fused was rare. There were exceptions, okay? Contemporary Cyprus is an exception. Northumbria in Britain was an exception. There's there's some exceptions to this. But for the most part, you had a strong institutional church, right, alongside a state. Now, they formed very close alliances, right, and they worked together a lot, right, but they were never fused. Right? And some people have pointed out, in fact, there's someone named John Neville Figgis, who argued that what we saw in the late Middle Ages, right, to some extent, was a struggle between church and state. But he also saw it as it being, in one sense, a struggle between state and freedom of conscience. Right? And in a way that seems odd to us, right, he said that actually the church in those days was the voice of personal conscience, right? Particularly the right of the individual to say, no, this is wrong, and I'm not going to obey the state. Now, this stands in contrast to a lot of ancient empires in which religion was just an extension of the state. And that's true of the Greek city-states as well. Okay? Religion was a civic function, right? And it wasn't differentiated in the same way. Now, Figgis's argument is that they didn't manage to resolve this conflict properly because they didn't emphasize actual freedom of conscience. But there is this idea there, right, that in the West, there's traditionally been this idea that the state doesn't get to swallow everything up, right? And the state isn't the final arbiter, right, of what's right and what's wrong, or what can be done and can't be done. Right? So historically, there is some support for this claim that the primacy of the person has been central in Western civilization. Right? Now, whether that's untrue of other civilizations or simply understood in a different way is a question I really can't answer. Right? But historically, what he says about the West does have some basis.